We'll now recognize members for questions, 5-minute rounds, and I'll start off. The three of you gave us testimony on behalf of the administration, and I thank you for your presentations. Our nation is facing some very difficult energy challenges, and we have ignored them for too long. We're overly dependent on foreign sources of oil. Our economy is in a recession. We are no longer leading in the development of clean energy technology, and we are polluting our environment. President Obama is trying to confront these problems. He has said we need a comprehensive energy policy that creates new clean energy jobs, promotes energy independence, and tackles the tremendous threat of global warming. Chairman Markey and I tried to draft a proposal that addresses these three issues. And what I want to ask you is whether you think our draft accomplishes the President's goals. Let me begin by asking about jobs and our economy. Americans are hurting, and this is the first question on most of our minds. Administrator Jackson, do you believe the bill would create jobs here in the U.S. and stimulate economic growth?
I do indeed, Mr. Chairman. I believe this is a jobs bill, and it is a jobs bill that focuses our country's attention on the growth industry of the future, which is the clean energy industry. There are opportunities here for us to create literally millions of jobs in the green energy sector.
Could you move the microphone a little closer? Some of the members are complaining about not being able to hear. Secretary Chu, do you agree? Would this bill put us on the path toward a clean energy economy?
I absolutely agree with that. I think, as you yourself noted, the world has rapidly changed its attitude towards carbon emissions, and it's continuing to do so. So in a future world, it is very clear that we will be living in a carbon-constrained world, so the action will be, how do you transition to a sustainable energy future? The United States must position itself in a way so that we can lead this transition, that we take advantage of the full intellectual opportunities and vigor of this country to develop those technologies that will add to our economic prosperity.
And Secretary LaHood, what do you think about the creation of jobs and helping our economy with the Obama proposal?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that nothing has taken as much time for this administration than trying to get the economy going. This is the #1 priority for this administration, and I know it is for Congress also. And I know that's why Congress passed the Economic Recovery Act, which many of us in this administration are implementing to try and get our fellow Americans back to work. And we're certainly doing that at the department. I believe that the work that you are all doing, the bill that you have laid out, will go a long way to creating jobs, and particularly I want to note green jobs. And in the area that we work at the Department of Transportation, we believe there will be a number of green job opportunities created around the country as a result of the approach that's being taken by your legislation. And this is the reason that we're here today.
Let me ask you this, though. The other objective, one of the other objectives, is to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Americans are tired of sending billions and billions of dollars overseas for oil, in many countries to countries with hostile governments. Do you believe this bill will reduce our dependence on foreign oil?
Absolutely. I think it sets the bar very high, and obviously one of the concerns that all of us in public policy positions have faced is the ire of the public when a barrel of oil goes up and gasoline goes up, and people are not able to use their automobiles. And I think this approach will help. The approach that you're taking in your legislation will relieve our dependence on foreign oil by creating other opportunities for people, certainly in the area of transportation.
Thank you very much. I assume Secretary Chu and Administrator Jackson, you agree this will reduce our dependence on foreign oil as well?
Yes, yep. I do.
The third goal of this discussion draft is to effectively address the danger of global warming. We want to craft legislation based on science, and that means a bill that makes the global warming pollution reductions scientists tell us are necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change. Secretary Chu, does this bill represent an effective response to the threat of global warming? Does it take the necessary steps at home to ensure that America can restore global leadership in this issue?
It does.
And do the other two of you agree with that position? Administrator Jackson?
Yes, I certainly do, Mr. Chairman. This bill includes strong targets, and it moves us to addressing global warming pollution by establishment of a cap-and-trade program, which I think many businesses agree is the way to harness private investment and capital on our side in reducing pollution and creating the green energy economy.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Secretary LaHood?
I agree.
Okay, good. Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, I want to commend you and Mr. Markey on one thing that I did in my opening statement. We have had intense debates about the number of Republican witnesses versus Democrat witnesses at these hearings. In this case, I want to commend you on your administration panel. You went out of your way to make sure we had a Republican witness, and we didn't even have to ask. So I should have commended you for that. So we appreciate you doing that.
We commend the American people for that.
Very good. Thank you. And the President for appointing him. Administrator Jackson, your agency yesterday came up with an economic impact analysis of the pending draft. How were you able to do that since the most important economic component of the draft has no allocation cost scheme in it?
At the request of the drafters, we did indeed release economic modeling, and in order to do it, we had to make assumptions about how allowance revenue would be distributed. At the request of the drafters, those assumptions were put into the modeling.
Is that, I haven't seen the analysis, but are those economic assumptions and allowances cost, are those public?
Yes, they are, and the modeling is public.
They're public. Thank you. Your administration, your agency also recently came up with a finding that CO2 is hazardous to health and therefore should be regulated under the Clean Air Act. Just what is the health hazard, since CO2 itself is not a pollutant?
Well, the proposed finding would classify CO2 as a criteria pollutant. And the health impacts associated with CO2, especially for the very young and for the elderly, are exacerbation of other impacts from pollution. CO2 acts to make impacts from pollution worse, because the CO2 and the warming that it causes, the climate change is actually...
but inhaling CO2 is, being exposed to CO2 in and of itself is not a health hazard.
Well, right. Well, CO2, in the absence of oxygen...
I mean, you're creating CO2 as you talk to me.
I think I understand your question, sir, which is if you inhale only CO2, certainly that would make you sick. You wouldn't live without oxygen. But the CO2 and the endangerment finding is based on scientific analysis of CO2 and 5 other greenhouse gases and their impact on the welfare of our country and then human health because of
do we have examples in your finding of CO2 pollution causing death or large illnesses? Or, I mean, we know SO2 and we know mercury and we know lead. We know the criteria of pollutants. Even ozone causes asthma or can exacerbate asthma, and we don't have that with CO2.
Right. The finding, the proposal answers the question put to us by the law and by the Supreme Court, which is, do these greenhouse gases as a class endanger public health and welfare? And the finding is based on an analysis of what the greenhouse gases do first to our environment and our planet and what that means for human health.
Okay. Well, I thank you for those answers. Mr. LaHood, or Secretary LaHood, former Chairman Dingell in his opening statement yesterday talked about the need for specific funding for the automotive industry and some assistance in terms of meeting their emission requirements under legislation that was passed last year. Have you looked at former Chairman Dingell's comments, and if so, do you support some of the things that he said yesterday?
I'm sorry, I have not seen his testimony. I mean, I'll be happy to look at it, but I haven't seen it.
He was specifically saying that there should be a specific funding source in this bill to help the automotive industry meet the requirements in terms of their emission improvements that they have to meet. And he also said that for retooling issues and things that there should be additional funding. So you might just
You mean the bill that's under consideration
Yes, sir.
here by the committee?
If I understood him correctly, that's what.
Well, to be honest with you, Mr. Barton, I haven't thought about that, but I would say this: I don't know of another administration or another Congress that has done more for the American automobile manufacturer than the Obama administration and this Congress in the economic stimulus bill, and also last year in what Congress did in terms of the money available to the American automobile manufacturers. This administration,
Look, you
this
don't have to convince
administration
me,
is committed
Mr. Secretary.
to helping
I'm
the
one of the Republicans who voted for the auto package, so you don't have to commit. You don't have to.
No, if you're asking me if we're committed to helping the American automobile manufacturer, the answer is yes, we have, and I believe the President
I'm
will
specifically asking just to take a look at what Mr. Dingle said.
I didn't see his testimony, but I'd be happy to look at it.
All right, Dr. Chu, I don't want to leave you out. You're our scientist. I have one simple question for you in the last 6 seconds. How did all the oil and gas get to Alaska and under the Arctic Ocean?
This is a complicated story, but oil and gas is a result of hundreds of millions of years of geology, and in that time also the plates have moved around, and so it's the combination of where the sources of the oil and gas are.
But I mean, wouldn't it obvious that at one time it was a lot warmer in Alaska and on the North Pole? It wasn't a big pipeline that we created in Texas and shipped it up there and then put it underground so we can now pump it out and ship it back.
There's continental plates that have been drifting around throughout the geological ages. And
So it just drifted up there.
that's certainly what happened. And so it's a result of things like that.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Markey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Secretary Chu, I know you have spent a lot of time thinking about new energy technologies. Are you concerned that we could lose our leadership in new energy technologies to other countries?
I am very concerned of that. It actually tears my heart out to see what has happened. If you consider what happened, photovoltaics were invented by Bell Labs in the 1930s. We are not the leading manufacturer of silicon photovoltaics. Wind turbines, which were first deployed in the United States in the first energy crisis of the middle 1970s, that had gone overseas to Denmark, to Germany. Nuclear reactors, which we pioneered. Now Westinghouse, there's a major shareholder, and Westinghouse is now owned by a company in Japan. I am very concerned. The major power electronics of the world has drifted overseas. It's in Europe and it's in Asia. And so I see step by step us losing the technology lead. We need to bring those high technology jobs back, manufacturing jobs back to the United States. This bill will help that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. During the presidential campaign, now President Obama pledged that the United States could actually deploy 25% of our electricity from renewable resources by the year 2025, which would be a revolution in the way in which we generate electricity in our country. Do you agree with that assessment, that we can reach that goal by the year 2025, Mr. Secretary?
Yes, I do. I think when the American public and especially the science and technology part of the United States gets going, it can really move. And so, although it might seem like an ambitious goal, I think with the proper incentives, we can get there.
Could I ask you, Secretary LaHood, what role do you think that new advanced automotive technologies can play in revitalizing the American economy?
Well, we know from visiting with the automobile manufacturers that the kind of technology that they are developing in terms of hybrids, in terms of battery-powered automobiles, and then the standard that we have asked them to meet in terms of CAFE standards are going to allow the American people to have many, many choices in the future for opportunities to have automobiles that will emit far less CO2, and certainly the case is true with hybrids, and the further development of that, there's a couple of American automobile manufacturers that are developing, an all-battery automobile, and obviously that is going to go a long way to enhance our opportunities to.
Are you an optimist, Mr. Secretary, that if we continue to invest in these new technologies as an American strategy, that we can meet these goals?
I think the American automobile manufacturers have gotten the message. They need to get where the American people are, and the American people are ready to drive automobiles that get good gas mileage in the instance of those that use gasoline. But if the development of hybrids and battery-powered automobiles come on to the opportunities for people and are allowed to be developed, I think the American people are ready for that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Administrator Jackson, you've had a chance to look at the Waxman-Markey draft. Could you tell us, in your opinion, how that legislation could help to reduce our use of oil, our dependence upon imported oil in the United States?
Well, the bill, as you drafted it, is comprehensive in that it has several opportunities for advancing renewable energy, energy efficiency. We just heard about the opportunity to put forward electric cars, a low-carbon fuel standard, and all of those things, along with especially the energy efficiency, which is such low-hanging fruit right now for our country and which could start tomorrow in reducing our dependence. And then the longer-term options as we move towards a lower carbon future through a cap-and-trade program, all of those are drivers that will push us towards using less foreign oil right now as it makes us vulnerable.
We produce 8 million barrels of oil a day in the United States. We import 13 million barrels of oil a day. That is our weakness. We thank each of you for your leadership in helping us to address that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. Mr. Upton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd first like to ask Secretary Chu. Secretary Chu, the loan guarantees for nuclear are certainly, as many of us know, an essential part for building new projects such as new nuclear reactors. We know that you've proposed a revision to the DOE loan guarantee program, but as I understand it, OMB is not satisfied and has rejected the proposed change. In spite of that, can you comment on what we need to improve the program?
Yes, as you know.
And I don't know if is that a final resolution?
No. I believe that nuclear power has to be part of the energy mix in this century. I've stated that many times. I continue to state
That'll be my follow-up question, but go ahead.
And so we're certainly moving as aggressively as we possibly can. We're going to work out the differences with OMB to try to get those initial loan guarantees going. We are also using our budget of 2008, 2009, and going to 2010. We're helping getting the NRC licenses, particularly the AP 1000, so its generic design can be licensed. That's being done with the aid of the Department of Energy. We fully intend to use the resources of the Department of Energy to further develop nuclear technology. This is one of the areas of technology that the United States should recapture leadership in.
I was during your confirmation, I was heartened when you said nuclear is going to be part of our energy future. It has to be, and yet you had a statement a couple weeks later as it related to Yucca Mountain. As you know, there is no nuclear title as part of this bill, and I just want to know, as you indicate now, that nuclear needs to be part of the equation. Would the administration support a nuclear title to this bill, knowing that there's no greenhouse gas emissions? And what are we going to do about Yucca? And lastly, would you support reversing the President Carter decision on recycling, something that our subcommittee actually visited last year as we saw the French begin to or they've done it for now a number of decades, recycle the nuclear waste. It's my understanding that both Japan and the British are doing it as well. What are your comments in that regard?
So what we're planning to do is to appoint a blue ribbon panel to step back and take a fresh new look at how we're going to, a comprehensive plan of how we're going to deal with the nuclear waste. A lot has happened since the beginning of Yucca Mountain some 25, 30 years ago. And so without prejudging what these blue ribbon panels are going to find, I think it's an opportunity to actually develop a much more comprehensive and forward-looking plan. The fact that we're doing this, I see in no way conflicts with with my vision of trying to move the nuclear industry forward, to restart the American nuclear industry. We can and will develop a comprehensive nuclear waste plan. Now, with regard to the recycling issue, I think it's becoming increasingly apparent, even to France and Japan, that the current recycling technology used today, which isolates plutonium, has proliferation issues, serious proliferation issues. So what I intend to do is to start a vigorous research and development program to look for ways to close the fuel cycle, to actually recycle, but in a way that's proliferation resistant. So I think it's premature to start to build pilot plants today because we simply don't have those processes today. But in the long term, I think that's the goal.
Well, as we begin to embark on this legislation, would the administration support then a nuclear title, knowing that there's no greenhouse, a nuclear title to this bill, which it does not currently have now, to encourage the development and forward movement of additional new reactors?
I think the administration has supported this. We are trying to, as I said, restart the American nuclear industry again. It should be.
Oh, it ought to be yes. We look
yes,
forward to
the
working
answer
with
is
you.
yes.
Okay, good. Administrator Jackson, last year, I believe it was last year in testimony before our committee, your predecessors indicated that the Lieberman-Warner bill, had it passed the Senate, would really not change as long as other countries were not participating, India and China, the largest emitter. If they didn't participate, that the global temperature would change by a minuscule amount, less than 1 degree. Do you concur with that same thought now that we have a change in the administration?
I certainly concur with the concept, which is that global warming
doesn't happen without India and China?
That international leadership international action is needed to solve the entirety of the problem. Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair wishes to recognize the chairman emeritus of this committee, Mr. Dingell, under whose leadership as chairman we passed the last revisions to the Clean Air Act with a vote of 42-1. I'm hopeful we could get to 42-1 or that kind of a margin this time around, but I have my suspicions, given some of the opening statements, that we may not be able to succeed as you had it in the last go-around on the most important environmental legislation that we had passed. Mr. Dingell is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy. Thank you for those kind comments. I intend to try to work with you to see to it we get a good bill out of here. And I want to commend you for the legislation that you have brought forward. Welcome to our panel. And particularly our old friend Ray LaHood. Welcome back, Ray.
Thank you.
These questions for Secretary Chu. How many applications for the Section 136 Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Incentive Programs has the Department received?
Actually, the exact number I can't really
Would you
say.
submit that for the record, please?
Yes.
The current authorization for Section 136 is $25 billion. What is the total amount that has been requested?
Well in excess of that amount.
Would you give us the exact figure? And, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to write a letter to the departments asking to expand upon the questions that I'm making now, and that the response, that both that letter and the response be included in the record of the committee.
Without objection, that will be the order.
Mr. Secretary, and this goes to both you and Secretary, my old friend, Secretary LaHood. This country has had a wonderful experience. The new Chevy Volt was driven out of the factory on electric power. And that wonderful vehicle was driven out on batteries that were made in Korea. Now, we've had a policy in this country that's gone in effect and gone in and out like Murphy's glass eye. Each new administration comes in with a new package to stimulate new technology in the auto industry. And so we have a constant replacement of these programs, and they never work because they never get a chance to. What do you think we ought to do in this legislation to see to it that we finally get Chevy Volts driving out of the factory on American-made batteries, and to stimulate the technology of the American industry so that it will in fact produce cars of the kind that we want them to produce, and to do so in competition not just with foreign manufacturers, but with foreign governments which are subsidizing their manufacture.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to express my thanks for the warm welcome that you've given me here today, and to say to you that
you'll get a warmer welcome if you give me an answer.
I'm going to let Secretary Chu knows a lot more about this, but I want to say this. I do believe that there are some technology and research going on with respect to batteries that can be used by the American automobile manufacturers.
Very little support from our federal government. Very little.
Well, I suspect that
policy we have.
I suspect, given your interest in this, there may be a little bit more from Congress in the future. And
I want to get something like that in this legislation. I need your guidance, and that is Secretary Chu, to define what that will be.
You'll have our guidance.
All right, I will submit a letter on this, but I want you alerted to the fact something's got to be done on this. Now to Administrator Jackson. EPA is moving forward with an endangerment finding for greenhouse gases. When the Congress wrote the Clean Air Act, which our chairman so kindly referred to, it was our assessment at that time that CO2 was not a pollutant. In any event, you are now in this wonderful situation where you're going to have to regulate under the Clean Air Act unless this committee does something. Our chairman very happily has recognized this need, and in his bill and Mr. Markey's bill, there's a provision which will get us down to the point where the federal government is going to regulate those under the new legislation. I commend them for that. But just how many regulations and regulators will there be if we regulate under the Clean Air Act? My off-the-cuff figuring tells me it'd be something on the order of 106. Am I incorrect in that judgment?
I don't know how you came up with the number of 106, sir, but...
Would you give us an answer on that particular point, please?
Is the question whether there would be regulation under the Clean Air Act if this legislation...
Well, you're going to have to regulate everything in sight for CO2 production.
Well,
and I'm asking you how many, or I'm asking you to deny that we would have a situation where we would have as many as 106 regulations, perhaps more, on CO2 emissions, because you'd have to do it under the state implementation plans. You'd have to do it under all kinds of other regulatory powers of the states and the federal government, and you'd have, as I have defined it, a glorious mess. Do you deny that we would have a glorious mess if you have to do it under existing law?
Gentleman's time has expired, but we'd like to have you answer the question.
Thank you.
I look forward to your answers, gentlemen and ladies.
Thank you. First, let me state that I believe new legislation is the best way, as the President has said, and I certainly agree, to address the problem of global warming and greenhouse gas emissions in our country. I believe that The endangerment finding, the proposal that's out, certainly addresses that which the Supreme Court compelled us to do, which is to speak, as the Clean Air Act says EPA must now, as to whether greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, and that draft is out for comment. It certainly means that it is the first step in a potential regulation of greenhouse gases via the Clean Air Act. And if your point, sir, is that it is more efficient to do it via a bill, via new legislation, like this discussion draft envisions, then I couldn't agree more.
Secretary Chu, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, to answer Chairman Emeritus Dingel's question about the American Recovery Act is investing $2 billion in advanced battery manufacturing. Also, we are investing a significant amount of money in R&D to develop a next generation of advanced batteries.
Thank you. Mr. Stearns?
The first question I have is, this is directed to the Secretary of Energy. During your confirmation hearing, you testified that DOE has a legal obligation to safely dispose of nuclear waste. You said, I'm supportive of the fact that the nuclear industry is and should have to be part of our energy mix in this century. Doesn't it concern you then that nuclear energy does not even seem to be a part of this bill? And I think this is a follow-up to Mr. Upton's question.
Well, it's, while not specifically a part of this bill, if you look at the sum package of all the bills, like the American Recovery Act and stimulus, nuclear energy is supported in those other bills.
But don't you think there should be a separate title in this bill for nuclear energy? Just yes or no?
Pardon, what was the question?
Do you think there should be a separate title in this bill for nuclear energy? Just yes or no?
We're looking forward to working with the committee on...
No, just yes or no. Do you think it should be? Can I have your yes or no answer?
A separate title in nuclear energy?
Yes or no?
I think nuclear energy can be mentioned in this bill, but again, it's working with this committee and the administration in developing
Is that a no, then? You don't think nuclear energy?
No, that was we'll look at forward to working with the committee on and making sure that nuclear energy is part of our energy mix.
Last September, you made the statement that somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe, which at the time exceeded $8 a gallon. As Secretary of Energy, will you speak for or against any measures that would raise the price of gasoline?
As Secretary of Energy, I think, especially now in today's economic climate, it would be completely unwise to want to increase the price of gasoline. And so we're looking forward to reducing the price of transportation in the American family. And this is done by encouraging fuel-efficient cars. This is done by developing alternative forms of fuel like biofuels that can lead to a separate source, an independent source of transportation fuel.
But you can't honestly believe that you want the American people to pay for gasoline at the prices, the level in Europe.
No, we don't.
No, but somehow we have, your statement, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Doesn't that sound a little bit silly in retrospect for you to say that?
Yes.
Okay. You have also stated that the American electricity prices are anonymously low and that coal is our worst nightmare, largely due to its contribution to global warming. As Secretary of Energy, will you support coal-fired electric generation in order to provide affordable electricity for the American people?
Yes. I believe the full statement, when I made that statement, is that coal as it's used today, in China and India especially, where there's no trapping of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, mercury particulate matter, and no capture of the carbon dioxide, and when China was building coal plants at close to one a week, without the sequestering of any of these pollutants, is a nightmare. So I think going forward, I've also said that the world is not going to turn its back on coal, and the United States, again, should take a leadership position, as we have done in scrubbing the sulfur dioxide, the nitrogen oxide, the lead, the particulate matter, and working towards...
Does that mean you would support more coal-burning operations, generation?
I certainly will be working forward to supporting coal-burning operations as we work towards clean coal, absolutely.
Yeah, because President Obama in the campaign indicated if we can go to the moon, we certainly can burn coal cleanly. And he sort of indicated that he would support coal operation if the coal was burned cleanly. The EPA analysis contains a rather aggressive assumption about carbon capture and sequestration technology coming to market. Does the Department of Energy have any analysis that shows that CCS being available by, let's say, 2015?
Well, if you look at where we are today in terms of the capture technology and the sequestration technology, we're beginning, not only the United States, but Europe and Asia are beginning to look aggressively at piloting and bringing to commercial scale these projects. So it takes several years to build them. It takes several more years to have the lessons learned so that power companies can invest with confidence that this is not only technically feasible, but it's economically feasible. And so, as a minimum, I see 6, 8 years, for example, as a time when very serious deployment begins. But we're working as fast as we can to begin the testing, both at pilot scale and at commercial scale.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Rush?
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and I certainly want to add my kudos and commendations to my friend from Illinois, Secretary LaHood. It's good to see you again, Mr. Secretary, and welcome to all of our witnesses today. Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that the record is real clear here, that is my contention and others' contention that this bill is silent on nuclear simply because of the fact that nuclear just doesn't, nuclear energy doesn't generate any carbon emissions, so the bill is silent on this, and I think that it's the future of the nuclear energy field is going to be quite good and quite positive, and the nuclear energy field is subject to thrive under this bill. I want to you to know that my state has enormous investments in nuclear facilities, and we look forward to this bill and to the new era because we look forward to being able to generate jobs and additional revenues from nuclear energy. So, Mr. Chairman, the comments of those on the other side, you know, it kind of reminds me of the phrase, this dog just don't hunt no more, because they're operating under different kinds of premises here. So for the record, I wanted to clear that up. I do have a number of questions, and I'm going to try to ask each and every one of you, if you will, try to take a shot at these questions. I'm going to ask them all together, if I might. Because I've got if time permits, I've got another area of questioning that I'd like to engage in. Currently, the phrase green jobs and green job training and certification means different things for different jurisdictions, and each state or locality may define training and certification differently. In your opinion, should the federal government set standards for training and certification, and should that be done through legislative language or through the EPA's administration of the program? The next question, how do we ensure that local communities with large percentages of populations without college or advanced degrees be recruited and trained in green job technologies in order to be a part of the job creation and economic boom that this new energy sector is certain to create? And lastly, how do we ensure that minority and women-owned businesses are able to gain equal access to federal funding in order to take advantage of the entrepreneurship and innovative business opportunities that this new energy section will enable? Should the rules of the road be written through legislative action or through the administration and implementation within the agencies, how do we track this funding and ensure that the people we're trying to reach are indeed the recipients of this fund? Each one of you can take a crack at that.
Mr. Chairman, let me just see if I can answer the question on green jobs, because in the economic recovery plan, the Department of Labor is receiving a lot of money to really implement the kind of opportunities for training for green jobs. And if Secretary Solis were here, she could really get in depth on this. But at our cabinet meeting that we had just this week with the President, she talked about the opportunities that are going to be created through her department with the money that comes from the economic recovery plan for training for people in the whole area of green jobs.
Let me also add that Secretary Solis and I had visited a community college recently, where this community college was training, providing the proper training for these new green jobs. I think you raise a very important part. There are certainly many examples across the country where proper training programs have been developed. Right now, because of the urgency of what we're trying to do in terms of getting the economic recovery money out there and in practice, we first want to just make sure that best practices are shared in states.
Yeah, Administrator Jackson, would you speak specifically to the issue of certification and training?
Certainly, Mr. Rush. Let me first state that, environmental justice in the future is going to also mean that this green economy is green for all, as others have said, to coin a phrase that others have coined. So I think that what you're asking is whether or not there needs to be assurances that all are actually able and ready to partake as we create and embark on putting America right in the bullseye of the green energy economy, and certainly it should be. Again, I would defer to my colleague Secretary Solis as to how to do that. I'm an environmental specialist myself.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired. We'd like to, at this time, to recognize Mr. Whitfield.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I certainly want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and it's great to have Secretary LaHood here with us, who many of us had an opportunity to enter Congress with in 1994. But I think it's imperative that as we discuss this issue of energy policy, that we not go into this with rose-colored glasses, and that we just get it all out on the table, and then, the Congress will make its decision, and the American people will be very much aware of the pluses and the minuses about all of this. Now, The Economist, a couple of weeks ago or last week, had an article entitled "Saving the Planet and Creating Jobs May Be Incompatible." And in that article, they specifically referred to President Obama when he was in Europe. He gave a speech and he said, think of what's happening in countries like Spain, where they're making real investments in renewable energy. They're surging ahead of us, poised to take the lead in these new industries. This isn't because they're smarter than us or work harder than us, but because they're making investments with government funds in renewable energy, and these investments are paying off with good, high-wage jobs. And then we hear a lot about green jobs, and we want green jobs. We need green jobs, particularly at this time in our nation's history with our economic problems. And we've heard a lot of models being used about the jobs that are going to be created. And we hear models used about how cap and trade and renewable can improve the health care of the American people and can reduce dramatic weather changes and so forth. And we know that with all models, there are all sorts of problems with models depending on the information that's going in. But I wanted to ask you all, you, Mr. Chu, particularly, and Ms. Jackson, if you had read Gabriel Alvarez's study. He's at King Juan Carlos's University in Madrid, and he used empirical data based on the government subsidizing renewable energy in Spain. And he came up with the conclusion exactly how much every job cost, and I know that President Obama in this renewable energy package is modeling, using Spain as one of the models. But for every job created in the renewable energy sector, in the so-called green jobs, they lost 2.2 jobs. And this is a 50-page empirical study that he conducted. And I was just, have either one of you seen his study?
No, sorry, I'm not familiar with the study.
Were you aware of the study? Had you even heard about it?
Generally, I know that there are many studies out. That particular study I have not reviewed.
Well, you've heard time and time again that people are concerned about loss of jobs. I mean, the issue on cap and trade, of course, is that, yeah, they're not using scrubbers. They're not using carbon capture and sequestration. They're bringing on one new coal-powered plant every 2 weeks. How do we deal with that, Mr. Secretary, if we unilaterally move to take steps and China and India and other countries are not? How do we deal with that?
Well, this is an issue where I believe the United States should take a leadership role. The President has emphatically stated that. And I actually believe that other developing countries like China, Mexico's already stated that they want as a goal to reduce their carbon, even though they're a developing country, that they would like to reduce their carbon emission by 50% by 2050. And I think if the United States does take the lead, China will follow.
Well, I hope that as you work with the committee that you all will keep these jobs as a priority, because if we're losing 2.2 jobs in existing industries, as they did in Spain, and they only picked up one job in green, the economy, then that's a losing proposition. And I would also just point out a study that Johns Hopkins did, for example, that said if you replace 3/4, for example, of U.S. coal-based energy with higher-priced energy, because we're going to increase the price of energy with cap and trade and other things, it would lead to 150,000 premature deaths annually in the U.S. alone. Now, that was a study at the Johns Hopkins. Have you all seen that study? Because we hear a lot of benefits, you know, from moving the direction we're moving, but this shows the negative aspect of it. Have you seen that study?
No, Mr. Whitfield, but I'd be happy to review it.
Okay. Well, my time has expired. Thank you.
Time has expired. The chair would request of the gentleman that he submit that study, because I think the committee would like to look at it carefully. Mr. Gett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up, first of all, on some questions that were being asked, that Mr. Rush was asking about the effect of this legislation on low-income individuals. And I'm wondering, Administrator Jackson, if you could tell us in the EPA's analysis how the discussion draft might affect the economy and individual households, in particular low-income households.
Certainly. The overall message from EPA's modeling, and again, it was based on assumptions from the drafters that I can discuss in a second, was that the impact is quite modest on the economy in general, and that the impact on the average household annualized over a year, an annualized impact for a year is around $98 to $140.
And why is that? Why is that impact relatively modest? Because to many outside observers, they think that this is going to present a huge cost burden to American families.
Well, one of the opportunities and one of the things that I know this committee has before it to discuss is what happens with the money generated from the allowances. The value in the cap and trade system is in this currency called allowances. And one of the assumptions we made in the modeling was that about 40% of that money would go back to the American people, to households in the form of rebates.
So even though the discussion draft is silent as to where the allowances would go, if the committee made the determination to put those at least 40% back to American families, then that would help reduce the impact on individual households, correct?
Certainly that is the driver there.
Another question that I have, and this is really for Secretary Chu, but also either of the other witnesses could answer. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how realistic the discussion draft's reduction targets are, both near term and long term.
I think they're aggressive, but I think we can meet them. If you look back in history of how we've actually met certain things, like the Clean Air Act, clean water, how we dealt with the ozone layer, invariably what happens, especially of that aggressive but obtainable target of 2050 that you reduce carbon by 83%, I think it's science and technology that's going to lead the way that give us those solutions. In the near term, efficiency will give us most of the gains immediately, and it will also save us money.
Let me ask you this question. Much has been made by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle of the fact that India and China in particular, but also other developing countries, don't seem to have much of a interest in controlling global climate change right now. Is that a reason for us to not move ahead with our aggressive goals in the U.S., Mr. Secretary?
The view of China has changed dramatically in the last several years. I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to speak with Premier Wen Jiabao for about an hour on this issue. They are taking very seriously because they see the impacts of climate change in their own country, and so they're taking very
let me stop you. What about India?
India is less far along in this realization.
Now, so to answer my question then, in particular with India, but to a lesser degree with China and maybe other developing countries, is there lack of prioritization of this issue reason for us to not move forward?
No, we have to move forward. Right now, the United States and China represent 50% of the carbon emissions of the world. And as we go forward, we have to take those leadership positions.
Now, if say we don't get China participating fully, although we hope we will, if we don't get India and the other developing countries participating, what is that going to do towards the bill's reduction targets? In other words, are the draft legislation's targets tied to reductions in these third world countries, or can we maintain some reductions in and of ourselves?
No, I think that what the bill is saying is that we will go forward and we will start to aggressively start to reduce the carbon emissions in the United States. But in a cap and trade scheme, it also provides for offsets. Some of those offsets, much of those offsets will be in the United States to the agrarian parts of our country, but some of that could also be used to help bring in developing countries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gett. Representative Bono-Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank our distinguished panel of experts for their time today. And just want to start by saying my congressional district is probably one of the most beautiful congressional districts, with all due respect to all of my colleagues. And I'm extremely proud of the work we have done on renewables. We have invested, we believe, if you start in one end of my congressional district, you'll see windmills that we're very famous for. You can go to the other end and see a lot of geothermal capacity, and certainly a lot of hope in between for solar projects. But conversely, my congressional district is also one of the top 5 hardest hit in the housing crisis. So this legislation is keenly important to me and to my district. As a Californian, I believe in innovation, and I believe there's a lot in this bill that can go a long way towards energy independence. I believe there's a lot in this bill that will promote the technologies that we all believe in. But again, I have very, very big concerns about the cost and what this will do to my constituents. California's rates are, on average, about 65% higher than the rest of the nation for electricity. And this truly can be a matter of life and death for my constituents. In the summertime, we see the deaths occur for people who are afraid to turn on their air conditioning. Years past, we saw a flawed deregulation bill in California that created vast unintended consequences where we saw rolling blackouts, and we saw what flawed policy, whether it be out of Sacramento or Washington eventually, can do to harm people. So my concerns in this bill, I believe, have been well known, and my colleague, Mr. Upton, has asked each of you answer the questions in writing about what will this do for the cost of energy on our consumers, and I look forward to seeing those answers from all of the panelists. But I'd like to know from Administrator Jackson, the EU, California's AB 32, the Western Climate Initiative, and Northeast RGGI system all handled transportation fuels outside of a cap-and-trade program. And in the case of California in particular, it works with fuels through a low-carbon fuel standard. We have portions of both approaches in this draft legislation. Is it your opinion that putting fuels under the cap-and-trade is the right approach, or can we separate fuels out with a low-carbon standard?
My opinion is that it is extraordinarily important that we deal with transportation fuels and that we do it in a way where we see meaningful reductions in the carbon footprint of those fuels, like a renewable fuel standard, like the low carbon fuel standard, which are in this bill. I do believe that there are alternate approaches, and I think the committee will have the opportunity to discuss that and find the most effective way of dealing with it. And I think anything EPA can do to assist you in those discussions, we're happy to.
Well, you could start by answering the question, should it or should it not be under an economy-wide cap-and-trade system?
Well, I think that it can be addressed either way, and I don't think there is a right or a wrong. I think that it should be evaluated and discussed in terms of what gets the best result.
Secretary LaHood, I am a firm believer that the new clean diesel needs to be a little bit more thoroughly discussed in Washington, that there's great promise in clean diesel, but I might be entirely misguided. I would love to know your thoughts on clean diesel and if there is a role, whether it be under low-carbon fuel standard or just in increased CAFE, where clean diesel might fit in.
First of all, I will agree with you that you have one of the most beautiful districts in the country, and some of the most beautiful golf courses, too, by the way. But I'm not prepared to talk about the diesel standard. I don't know whether Secretary Chu or Administrator Jackson can do that, but I'd be happy to get back to you with, after I look into it. That is not something that I have expertise in. I don't know if either one of these two folks want to say something about it or not.
Yes, I think the Department of Energy is certainly funding programs that develop clean diesels. As you know, there has been a change in the technology in diesels, and moderate-sized diesel engines can now satisfy the very stringent California EPA rules on particulate matter, on NOx, that we didn't think was possible 5 and 10 years ago. I should also say that I'm very proud of the fact that the Department of Energy funded a program to works with Sandia Labs with Cummins that makes large diesel engines to actually use high-performance computing to design a cleaner diesel. And it actually reduced the design time by 15%. The engine was designed in software and built and said it satisfies our design goal, and they went into production. So clean diesel is something that we will be investing in.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like our colleagues, I'd like to welcome our new secretaries and particularly our former colleague, Ray LaHood. Ms. Jackson, the EPA produced a preliminary analysis of the economic impact of the discussion draft. It was publicized yesterday, and the analysis did not measure the overlapping impacts of a carbon cap, the renewable electricity standard, the efficiency standards, the new plant regulations, and the low-carbon gasoline program. From what I understand, it was a preliminary draft. And when can we expect the analysis of measure that includes all parts of the bill taken together?
Well, I think that we will be happy to provide additional modeling analysis once the bill is ready, once you have an actual bill. It was a discussion draft. It was incomplete. EPA was asked by the drafters to model a narrow portion of it, and as I mentioned, we had to make quite a few assumptions to do that, but EPA stands ready to provide additional modeling analysis at the request of the committee.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. In fact, since we're going to markup in our subcommittee next week, I don't know if we can get those specifics to you because some of those decisions are being made now, but appreciate the update on the analysis. The discussion draft both regulates refining through a carbon cap and imposes a new gasoline standard for carbon, essentially regulating these fuels twice. Last year, when the Senate considered a climate bill, there were estimates of gasoline price increases as high as 129%. And of course, last year's price of gasoline was $4, so 129% was very substantial compared to what gasoline may be today. My question for both EPA and DOE, would EPA and DOE perform an analysis of the gas prices and supply that considers the impact of the implementation of the second stage of the Renewable Fuels Program, the new low carbon program, and the carbon cap before we mark up the legislation? Is that possible? That would look at both of those, the new low carbon program and the carbon cap before we get to a markup on the legislation?
Are you asking about the low carbon program in this bill, sir?
In this bill, and yeah, the low carbon program in this bill, along with the other requirements that we're going to have on refining capacity and ultimately the price of fuel. Does EPA and DOE have the capability to do that?
I know that EPA's capabilities are focused around the impact of the cap and trade on emissions and then allowance prices, but I'm certainly happy to work with the Department of Energy to make sure we get you whatever we can through.
Secretary Chu, is that possible?
Pardon, was what possible? Can you?
That since we had some estimates in the Senate last year on a climate change bill as high as 129% gasoline cost increases, does DOE perform an analysis of the gasoline price and supply that considers the impact of the implementation of the second stage of the Renewable Fuels Program, the new low carbon program, and the carbon cap before we have an opportunity to mark up the legislation?
Yes, we will get the EIA and we'll get you that information.
Thank you. I guess this one's for the Dr. Chu or the Secretary Chu. The administration, in testimony, you talk about the administration believes a renewable electricity standard could help create a stable investment environment for America's innovators to do what they do best, create new jobs and entire industries. And I know coming from the state of Texas, we don't have a percentage. I know the bill calls for 25% renewable electricity standard. The House in 2007 passed a 15% renewable electricity standard that included electricity efficiencies. Why is the difference to have a national standard as compared to what a lot of states are doing? Some, particularly in the South, have hard kilowatt hours that they say this is what we're going to use from renewable electricity. In Texas is a good example because of the growth in wind power. But why do we need a national standard when a lot of the states are already doing it?
Well, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but when I meet with industry representatives, many of the industry representatives who are in these renewable energies want a national standard. It creates a uniform basis. With that plus trading and the option for states to do this will create a market so that people who want to develop these new industries and further advance them and deploy them will say that we have a market, we can make these hundreds of millions of dollars in investment across the country.
Okay. My colleague, Congresswoman DeGette from Colorado, pointed out some of the concerns I think some of us may have about international agreements, because I represent an area that's refining capacity. And the refining that we do in Houston, Texas could easily be transferred to China or India or Libya or Saudi Arabia, who would love to be enhance their product instead of being crude oil suppliers. They would love to be refined product suppliers. Our concern is that the United States needs to be a leader, but we also need to recognize that some of the requirements we do, similar to what our trade legislation has in the past, that even if a country has very strong environmental laws, they're typically not enforced. Don't you think, particularly dealing with climate change and carbon, because if a ton of carbon goes up in Houston, Texas, and a ton of carbon goes up in China, it's basically the same on the worldwide impact, unlike some of our other pollutants. Do you feel like this legislation, at least the draft that we have now, is strong enough in dealing with not only the United States leading, but also bringing the developing world along in trying to make sure that we don't have that dislocation of some of our basic industries?
Gentleman's time has expired, but we'd like to ask the witnesses to answer the question.
Very briefly, I think this is the reason why this bill is advocating cap and trade. The cap and trade with allowances begins to bring in developing countries. I think the administration wants to work very much with this committee on deciding how to dispose of the allocations. We already talked about sensitivity to the most vulnerable parts of our society, and also there's a sensitivity with regard to the heavily energy-intensive industries, like as you speak. And so this is something with, the administration will work with the committee on dealing with these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Walden?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our panelists for being here today. The first question I have, given the complexity of this legislation, I just want to make sure each of you has actually read the draft bill in its entirety. Can you give me a yes or no? Have you read it in its entirety?
I haven't had time to read all 600 pages.
648, but that's...
I've not had time to read all 648 pages.
Neither have I.
Ms. Jackson?
Nor have I. My staff have certainly read through it.
Okay, well then I want to draw your attention to a couple of issues. First of all, I come from a district that's very rural, 70,000 square miles, home to 11 national forests, where we have all kinds of catastrophic fires and enormous overgrowth of wood fiber. Is there a scientific reason, Dr. Chu, for excluding woody biomass off federal land under the definition on page 8 of biomass? And why would the administration support that exclusion?
Well, the administration will be working with the draft of this bill.
Do you support this draft? Do you support the definition of biomass as found on page 8?
I would certainly look forward to working with you in terms of looking at how biomass is defined.
Okay, well, biomass is defined right now on page 8 as you couldn't take any of this off federal land. Federal land is completely excluded. I'd love to know the scientific reason for doing that. Second, there are all these other definitions that private timber growers in my part of the world tell me would basically make it impossible for them to participate in woody biomass development, whether that's a chip plant, whether that's a pellet plant, whether that is all the stuff that's being invested in right now. And yet our Department of Environmental Quality in Oregon says basically there's virtually no emissions from heating sources that come that are heated with the wood pellets. This is a disc. They want to make these in my district using woody biomass off private and federal ground, put it in a mix with coal-burning power plant, reduce carbon emissions and improve efficiencies, and yet under this legislation, you couldn't do that. It wouldn't count. Let me move on to hydro. Is hydropower renewable or not?
Hydropower is renewable.
Can you give me the scientific reason for why hydropower prior to 2001 is not renewable in this legislation?
I think whether it's included in this legislation or not, just like the definition of biomass, is not a scientific question.
Okay, I agree. So there is no scientific reason. It's a political reason.
Well, I think the issue here is with hydropower, one wants to encourage new forms of renewable.
Okay, let me go to that. Page 11, new forms. It says the hydroelectric project installed on the dam is operated so at the water surface elevation at any given location and time that would have occurred in the absence of the hydroelectric project is maintained subject to the license, et cetera, et cetera. Now, my understanding, we have a lot of wind energy in my district. All this synergy is with the hydro system being able to store water when the wind's blowing and be able to balance out the load. This is Bonneville Power. Apologies to my colleagues here. This is wind energy, 1,000 megawatts that dropped to 0. This is the hydro system. Now, is there any way that new hydro could be used to balance out, thank you, balance out wind energy if the pool level cannot be modified?
Actually, I think that especially in Oregon and with the Bonneville Power Administration, this is something I hardly not only support, but I'm encouraging them to look at pump storage as a method of storing wind energy.
Right.
When the wind,
and I don't have any problem with that. I think it's great, but you're going to store that behind some dam, right?
That's correct.
And you're going to affect the level somewhere, aren't you, if you add hydro? If you add a hydro facility? Could we meet this definition that says at no time and in no location behind a facility that the water level could change because you added hydro? How would you ever meet that?
Well, I must confess I'm not familiar with this particular part of the bill.
Page 11. And with all due respect, I'm going to move on because I only have 40 seconds. Back to Ms. Jackson. In your EPA evaluation of the cost of this legislation, you only included, if I heard you correctly, the cap and trade provisions, correct? In your analysis?
Correct. EPA was asked to model what the impact of the cap and trade.
Okay, so in your model, since I've not had a chance to read through it, what percent did you allocate to auction? What percent were allocated credits? And what cost per ton of carbon did you factor in your model?
The allowance price that came out of EPA's analysis in 2012 is $12 to $15 a ton, $17 to $22 a ton in 2020. And I forgot the other part of your question.
Percent of auction and percent of allocation.
Yeah, the model did not, I believe, I can double check this for you, but I don't believe that question needed to be answered in order for the modeling to occur. But I will double check.
Because that hasn't been answered in the draft text either.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank
Ms.
the witnesses.
I think we just.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just take a second to continue for my friend, Mr. Walden from Oregon. I grew up in the shadows of Grand Coulee Dam, and we do have a lot of hydro energy in this country. And I know this discussion is what we should be doing. This is a draft bill. My thought would be that we want to move, if we counted everything we already have, it would less incentivize us to go forward. And this legislation, I would hope, from my reading of it, is something that we want to push us forward, and then at some point we'll have a debate about what counts from what we already have, for starters. But you know, as the 39th Earth Day was celebrated on Sunday in my district, there was a lot of enthusiasm and anticipation that this year could mark a big turning point, that we are finally addressing in a very significant way some long-standing energy issues and the challenge now of global warming. A question quickly for each of the three of you. Secretary Chu, one of the important features of the discussion draft is that it is a very comprehensive approach to our energy problems. We have one title devoted to clean energy, deployment which will help us win the race against China and other countries to establish leadership in clean energy technology. Title II on energy efficiency, a huge title also, and a whole Title III that sets up a system to reduce global warming pollution and hold energy companies accountable. And finally, a title seeking to protect consumers as well as our industries as we transition to this new energy policy, huge shift in the 21st century. A lot of people have been arguing that this is taking on so very much, that this comprehensive approach is way too much, that we should parse these out. Can you give us a brief but compelling reason why it's important to address these in a comprehensive way?
I think it's because, again, going back to what the President has said, we've been doing this piecemeal for decades. And quite frankly, it's time, because there are going to be trade-offs here, there, everywhere, so I commend this committee and the chairman on actually moving forward with a comprehensive bill. This is what the country needs.
Thank you very much. Administrator Jackson, the recent endangerment finding is showing that greenhouse gases indeed do threaten the public's health and welfare. And, you know, despite our very best efforts in this bill and other legislation as well, the climate is changing, has caused effects, and will, despite these efforts, continue to do so. And that is why I'm a public health nurse by background, and I'm committed along with you and others, to ensuring that this legislation helps the American public and also helps developing countries adapt to the public health impacts of climate change. I actually have some legislation to introduce separately on this topic. What are some significant and targeted investments, such as monitoring, planning, education, and so forth, that would ensure that we promote and protect public health in a changing climate?
Well, one of the easiest investments that can be made is communities or governments investing in heating centers or places that protect people from extremes of climate. If we're looking at warming in areas, we've seen the impacts, literally deaths that happen in heat waves, and one of the ways that can easily be addressed is by making climate centers or comfort centers. You see that especially in urban areas. On top of that, I think you mentioned education. First, public health professionals are on the front line of this, so I thank you for your work. Educating people about how to deal with changes in the climate and how to, if they have health effects that are going to be exacerbated by that, how to be aware and alert. Not unlike what we do with ozone alert days, making them understand what's coming so that they can take care of themselves is probably one of the first ways to keep you from having to take care of them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And there's more to come, I know. But finally, Secretary LaHood, our former colleague, the average person in the United States now spends about 20% of their income per month on transportation, largely on maintaining and driving personal vehicles. What are some specific ways this legislation will help invest in people's ability to take more affordable, low-carbon transportation opportunities?
We think that there are opportunities to develop a concept called livable communities, where you provide opportunities for people to get out of their automobiles if they want to walk to work, ride their bike to work, take a light rail to work, take a bus to work. And the model for this really is Portland, Oregon. They've done a marvelous job in really creating an opportunity for people to get out of their car and have opportunities. And we're working with the Secretary of HUD in developing a program that I hope can be included in the authorization bill of transportation, and also a program under HUD to really move forward with livable communities and create some models around the country and some pilots around the country to form different alternatives to people just using their automobiles. Obviously, the announcement the President made on high-speed rail, the work we're doing with transit districts under the economic stimulus bill for more buses, cleaner buses, and the opportunities for light rail. We think this is our opportunity in transportation and HUD to work with this committee to create opportunities for people to use alternatives other than automobiles.
Thank you very
Ms.
much.
Capps. Time has expired. Mr. Terry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. LaHood, my first question is for you, and this is a parochial question more than anything that has to do with cap and trade. But in the stimulus bill to our metropolitan area transit company, buses, all we get is buses. We don't get rail in our area. We're only a metropolitan area of 700,000, so we don't qualify. Our bus company is trading out their older diesel for just a newer brand diesel, not a cleaner energy, not natural gas. Is that the intention of the stimulus dollars, is just to let them trade out one piece of diesel equipment for another piece of diesel bus?
The transit portion of the economic recovery plan is our ability to work with transit districts around the country that want to buy new vehicles, build facilities, whether they be bus facilities, where bus shelters, or facilities where.
So the energy efficiency aspect isn't a criteria?
Well, look, I visited a bus company in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and the orders for these buses are way up.
Yeah.
And they're building
But I just want to know if energy efficiency or clean energy is part of the criteria. And I thought this was a softball question. I didn't know it was difficult.
Our people in the Federal Transit Administration are encouraging transit districts to buy fuel-efficient buses for their transit districts.
Okay, appreciate that. Dr. Chu, real quick, this isn't even a question, it's just my rhetoric, but you said in your opening statement that you know coal is going to continue to be an energy source, but we hear statements about cap and trade being used as a tool to force out coal as a fuel. And even President Obama said when he was campaigning that electricity, under my plan of cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. So if somebody wants to build a coal plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they are going to be charged a huge sum for all of the greenhouse gas that's being emitted. So you can see when the president makes statements like that, that there's some cynicism when we hear about, well, coal's still going to be a fuel. Now, Administrator Jackson, is setting the rate at $11 or $12 of per ton of CO2 meet the administration's goal of bankrupting coal-fired plants? Does that meet their goal?
The administration has no goal that is nefarious for coal. The president is on TV in ads. I see him talking about clean coal and how clean coal is crucial not only for the environment, but to create jobs and make coal, which is right now 50% of our... I'm going to interrupt you because I only have a minute 45.
Methane is a greenhouse gas that's in here, and it's reported that methane is going to be calculated at a time of 25% or 25 times the potency of CO2. Can you point me to a scientific study that says methane is 20 times or 25 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas?
I'd be happy to give you scientific backup for that statement.
I would appreciate that. Last, in regard to methane, what industry do we have in the United States that has to worry about methane emissions?
Well, methane is natural gas, CH4. So the natural gas industry, obviously, if any leaks, and in many states, addressing leakage from natural gas pipelines is one very quick and important way. The other are landfills, landfill gases in our country. As food waste decays, as organic waste decays, it makes methane. And previously that's been vetted.
What's the largest emitter of methane gas in the United States?
Largest emitter?
Probably cows.
May well be livestock.
Livestock.
Yeah, welcome to Nebraska, the cattle state, okay? Is it then the EPA's plan to start regulating the methane from cattle emissions?
EPA has no plans to regulate cattle emissions of any.
But there's nothing in this bill that exempts cattle.
This bill takes regulation of greenhouse gases for sources into this bill away from the Clean Air Act. And it's the Clean Air Act threat where people have spun these ridiculous notions of EPA taxing cows or regulating.
Well, that's been stated by publicly elected officials from Congress, so it's not spun stories.
Well,
but the point is about if nothing is in this bill that exempts the cattle industry, won't cattle have to be regulated?
I do believe that I do believe there is an exemption, but I will check on that. Obviously, this discussion draft is meant to make sure those interests are protected.
Just on that point, for the gentleman's information, only very large sources are covered by this, and there's a specific exemption for what would be considered cattle.